almost didn't, the father said, glaring at his son. Where is the machine I've traveled so far to see? Johannes's cheeks flamed. The metallurgist pointed toward the adjacent room. Go ahead, he directed the elder Gutenberg. I think you'll be more than pleased with the progress we've made. It can stamp nearly twice as many coins as the last machine. Johannes, not invited to see the device, hung back. He thrust his hand into his pocket and drew the metal piece out into the light, as if seeing it with his own 2 eyes might confirm that it was real. It was a coin. May I take a look? The metallurgist asked. He took the coin and bit it between his yellow teeth. Tin, he pronounced, flipping it back to Johannes. Where did you find that? He asked, his voice as much accusing as curious. Johannes held up the coin and watched the light dance on its edges. A man in the street gave it to me, the one they were calling a heretic. The metallurgist looked over his shoulder, then back at Johannes. That man will die today, and his death will mark the beginning of a new age. He pointed to an image on the coin. A woman's face. Do you see this? He said, his voice quivering. It's the mark of the coming revolution. And what about this? Johannes asked, indicating an impression on the flip side. The metallurgist smiled. That you will have to discover for yourself. 1. The occupants of Flight 1213 weren't surprised when the lights went out. They had been flickering for the last 10 minutes, so it was no shock when the blackness hit. It was more surprising, however, when the airplane dropped from the heavens like a bird shot in midair. August Adams could hear the scream from the first class over the deafening roar of the engines. A drink cart raced down the aisle, narrowly missing a curious youngster who retracted his head just in time. The plane leveled out for a brief moment, then dipped sharply to the left. A suitcase toppled out of an overhead storage unit, striking an old man, 2 rows up, on the forehead. He slumped forward. The child next to him began to wail. At the window in seat 24F, August flipped open his seat buckle and jumped to his feet. He climbed directly over the row in front of him, angering the businessmen parked there. Watch it, buddy, one of them said as August put a foot on his shoulder. August thrust his body over the next set of seats. The boy looked up at him and shrieked, What's wrong with Grandpa? Don't worry, it's going to be okay, August said to him, grabbing a scarf held out by a woman in the next row. A steady stream of blood oozed from the gash. The man appeared to be unconscious. August rummaged through his mental files, calling up a first aid manual he'd read during a CPR class. What's your grandpa's name? I think it's Ford, the boy said. August tied the scarf around the grandfather's head, pressing to stop the bleeding. He instructed the businessman behind him to apply pressure to the wound. The businessman shook his head. I'm staying right where I am, he said. Bathed in the red emergency lights that illuminated the cabin, the businessman bore the distinct impression of a man who had just wet his pants. This guy might die if you don't help me. The speakers crackled above them, probably the captain trying to tell them to remain calm. Too late, thought August. Why don't you do it? The businessman said, voice quivering. Because I need to find a first aid kit, August said. Come on, man. Just loosen your belt and lean forward. Wrap your hands around the top of the seat. I'll help you. I can't, said the businessman. I'm sorry. The 2 men next to him had their heads tucked firmly between their legs, their arms crossed protectively over their necks. They weren't going to be any help either. Someone get a first aid kit for this man, August said, slamming a fist down on the seat. The plane shook again, and he anchored his hand to the armrest like a bull rider. The lights came back on. August felt a tap on his side. Is my grandpa going to be okay? The boy was only a couple of years younger than his own son. August weighed his answer. I hope so, he said. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle with the first aid kit. She cracked it open and pulled out a wad of bandages, which she immediately placed over the old man's wound. Is there a flashlight in there? August asked, pointing to the kit. I think so, she said, rifling through it. The plane dipped and the contents spilled to the floor. August reached down and retrieved a small penlight. He pried open the old man's left eye and shone the light in it. Then he repeated the process for the right eye. You're checking for a concussion? If the injury caused his brain to swell, there could be dangerous tissue compression inside his cranium. That compression would put pressure on his optic nerves, and his pupils would react strangely to the light. August stepped into the aisle and had her take a look at the old man's eyes. You should check him every 15 minutes. Are you a doctor? I wish. You should ask for one on board. I just never forget a word I read. Lucky for him. Yeah, well, let me know if he's okay, August said, turning to go back to his seat. Down the aisle this time. The kid, too. He looked pretty frightened. He's not the only one, she said. Sorry about that, folks, the captain said, his amplified voice clear now. Please keep your seatbelts fastened, as we might be experiencing a few more bumps before we reach New York. If that was just a bump, I'd hate to see what a real problem looks like, the attractive occupant of 24D said to August as he squeezed past. Not that you wouldn't be able to handle it.